The night air hung heavy over Fairmont Crest, thick with the kind of silence that only came after chaos, as if the entire neighborhood itself were holding its breath, waiting for the inevitable ripple of consequences to spread from what had just happened inside Ashley's small but carefully kept home, where the soft glow of a single lamp illuminated the living room now turned makeshift emergency space, and on the couch, barely conscious, pale, and fading fast, lay Greyson, his breathing shallow, uneven, each inhale sounding like a battle he was rapidly losing, while Ashley knelt beside him with trembling hands stained by his blood, her mind racing faster than her training could ground her, because this wasn't just any patient. This was Greyson, the man who had spent months walking the fine line between ally and enigma, someone she had never fully trusted yet somehow couldn't push away, and now he was here, dying, and worse. He had insisted on coming to her, of all people, as if whatever burden he carried could only be released in her presence. "Ashley," he rasped, his voice barely cutting through the stillness, forcing her to lean closer, her heart pounding so loudly she feared she might miss his words. Don't let them twist this, you have to know the truth." And she shook her head instinctively, her instincts as both a doctor and a human being clashing violently. "Save your strength, Greyson, okay? Help is coming, you're going to be fine." Though even as she said it, her voice cracked, betraying the lie, because the truth was written in the coldness creeping into his skin, in the dullness overtaking his once sharp eyes, and Greyson gave a weak, almost bitter smile, as if he could hear the unspoken reality behind her reassurance. "No, no more lies," he whispered, coughing slightly, a trace of blood touching his lips as Ashley's composure fractured further. "You have to listen, because if you don't, they win." And something in the way he said they sent a chill down her spine, a warning she couldn't ignore, so she leaned even closer, her hand gripping his as though sheer willpower could anchor him to life. "Okay, I'm listening, I'm right here." And for a moment, Greyson closed his eyes, gathering what little strength he had left, before opening them again with a clarity that hadn't been there moments ago, as if the urgency of his secret had reignited a final spark within him. "It wasn't supposed to go like this," he began, his words slow, deliberate. "I didn't come here by accident. Everything you've seen, all the chaos, the betrayals, it's all connected." And Ashley felt her stomach drop, her mind immediately jumping to the tangled web of recent events. Tomas's suspicious moves, Nicole's sudden withdrawal, Danny's accusations, the unexplained threats that had seemed random at first but now felt like pieces of something far more sinister. "Greyson, what are you saying?" she pressed, her voice barely above a whisper, afraid that speaking too loudly might somehow shatter this fragile moment, and he tightened his grip on her hand, surprising her with the strength still lingering in him. "There's someone pulling the strings, someone you trust," he said, each word landing like a blow, and Ashley's heart skipped, her thoughts racing through the names of people she had relied on, people she had defended, people she had never once suspected. "Who?" she demanded, the urgency in her tone undeniable now, because this wasn't just about Greyson anymore, this was about everything. "Tell me who it is," and Greyson hesitated, his eyes searching hers as if weighing whether she was truly ready to hear what he was about to say. "You won't want to believe it," he warned, his voice breaking, and Ashley shook her head fiercely, tears already forming despite her efforts to stay composed. "Just tell me," she insisted, and for a split second, the world seemed to narrow to that moment, to the fragile thread connecting them, to the truth hanging in the balance. And then Greyson leaned closer, his voice dropping to a barely audible whisper as he revealed the name, a name that struck Ashley like lightning, her entire body going rigid as the reality of it crashed over her. But before he could fully finish, his body convulsed slightly, the strength leaving him all at once as his grip slackened, his eyes losing focus, and Ashley's breath caught in her throat. "Greyson? Greyson," she called out, panic overtaking her as she tried to shake him gently, desperate to pull him back, but it was too late. The moment had passed, the secret left hanging, incomplete yet devastating in its implication, and as the sound of approaching sirens finally cut through the silence outside, Ashley sat frozen beside him, her mind reeling, replaying his final words over and over again, trying to piece together the truth he had tried to give her, knowing that whatever he had uncovered was far bigger, far more dangerous than she had ever imagined, and that his death was not the end of the story, but the beginning of something far darker, because if Greyson was right, then the real enemy wasn't some distant threat lurking in the shadows. It was someone already inside their world, someone who had been watching, waiting, manipulating every move, and now, with Greyson gone, Ashley realized with a chilling certainty that she might be the next target, whether she wanted to be or not. The sound of the sirens grew louder, sharper, slicing through the stillness that had settled like a shroud over Ashley's living room, but she barely registered it at first, her entire world collapsing inward around the weight of what Greyson had almost said, the unfinished name echoing in her mind like a haunting refrain she couldn't escape. It's over and over again, as if her memory could somehow force the rest of the truth into existence, as if sheer desperation could rewind time by a few precious seconds and give him the strength to finish what he started. But reality was far crueler than that, and as she pressed trembling fingers to his neck, searching for any sign of a pulse she already knew she wouldn't find, the finality hit her all at once, a crushing, suffocating certainty that he was gone, truly gone, and whatever secret he carried had died with him, or worse, had been left for her to uncover alone. "No, no, Greyson, you don't get to do this," she whispered, her voice breaking as tears finally spilled over, her carefully maintained composure shattering completely now that there was no one left to hold it together for, because despite everything, the lies, the mystery, the suspicion, he had come to her, chosen her, trusted her in his final moments, and that meant something, whether she wanted it to or not, whether it made her a target or not. And as the front door burst open and paramedics rushed in, their voices urgent, professional, asking questions she could barely process, Ashley felt herself being pulled back into the present, forced to step aside as they confirmed what she already knew, one of them glancing at her with that familiar look, sympathy mixed with inevitability, before quietly shaking his head, and just like that, Greyson was no longer a man fighting to live on her couch, but a body, evidence, part of something official and procedural, and Ashley hated that. Hated how quickly the system stripped away the humanity of it all, because to her, he wasn't just another case, he was the key to something bigger, something dangerous, something that had now slipped through her fingers at the worst possible moment. As the paramedics worked, Ashley stood in the corner, arms wrapped tightly around herself as if she could physically hold herself together, her mind racing through every interaction she'd had with Greyson, every cryptic comment, every lingering look that now felt loaded with meaning she hadn't understood at the time, and slowly, pieces began to shift, connections forming where there had once been confusion, because he had known something that had scared him enough to run, to hide, to come to her bleeding and desperate, and that meant whoever they were, whoever was pulling the strings, wasn't just powerful, they were close enough to monitor him, close enough to silence him, and that thought sent a fresh wave of fear through her, because if they had been watching Greyson, if they had tracked him to her house, then it wasn't a stretch to assume they were watching her too, right now, in this very moment, and instinctively, she glanced toward the windows, half expecting to see a shadow, a figure, anything that would confirm her growing paranoia, but there was nothing, just the flashing red and blue lights reflecting off the glass, creating a distorted, almost surreal image that made everything feel even more unreal. "Ashley." The voice cut through her spiraling thoughts, and she turned to see Danny standing in the doorway, her expression a mixture of concern and suspicion, as if she had arrived ready to comfort, but couldn't quite shake the feeling that there was more to the story than what she'd been told, and Ashley felt a flicker of unease, because Danny was one of the names that had flashed through her mind when Greyson said the truth would be hard to believe. One of the people she trusted, but now wasn't so sure. "I came as soon as I heard," Danny continued, stepping inside slowly, her eyes scanning the room before landing on the scene at the couch, her face tightening as the reality of it sank in. "Is he?" And Ashley nodded stiffly, unable to form the words, and for a moment, neither of them spoke, the weight of the situation hanging heavily between them, until Danny finally broke the silence. "What happened?" she asked, her tone careful, measured, and Ashley hesitated, because the answer to that question wasn't simple, wasn't something she could just explain in a few words, not when it involved secrets and suspicions and a dying man's final warning. And yet, she also knew she couldn't tell Danny everything. Not yet. Not until she knew who she could trust. "He showed up. Like this," Ashley said finally, choosing her words carefully. "He was already bleeding, already weak. He didn't say much," which wasn't a complete lie, but it wasn't the full truth either, and Danny studied her for a moment, as if trying to read between the lines, before nodding slowly, though the doubt in her eyes didn't completely fade. Meanwhile, outside, another car pulled up, sleek, dark, and far less conspicuous than the flashing emergency vehicles, and from it stepped Tomas, his expression tense, his jaw set as he took in the scene before him. The crowd, the lights, the unmistakable signs that something had gone very wrong. Very quickly and without hesitation, he moved toward the house, his mind already racing with possibilities. Because if Greyson was involved, then this wasn't just an isolated incident. This was part of something bigger, something he had been trying to untangle for weeks now, and as he entered, his eyes immediately found Ashley, and for a brief moment, something unspoken passed between them, a shared understanding that whatever had just happened was only the beginning. "Tell me I'm wrong," he said quietly, though the look on her face told him everything he needed to know, and he exhaled slowly, running a hand through his hair in frustration. "Damn it, we were too late," and Ashley felt a surge of emotion at his words, because they mirrored her own thoughts exactly, that nagging, painful realization that if they had just moved faster, asked the right questions, paid closer attention, maybe Greyson would still be alive, maybe they would have the answers they needed, but maybe didn't change anything, didn't bring him back, didn't fill in the blank he had left behind. "He told me something," Ashley said suddenly, her voice low, drawing both Tomas and Danny's attention, and for a moment, she considered staying silent, keeping it to herself, but the weight of it was too much, the implications too serious to ignore. "Not everything, but enough," she continued, her eyes locking with Tomas's, because if there was anyone she might still trust in this moment, it was him. Despite everything that had happened between them, despite Danny's accusations, despite the uncertainty that had crept into all of their relationships, he said, "There's someone behind all of this, someone we trust," and the room seemed to still at her words, the air thick with tension as the meaning settled in, and Tomas's expression darkened, his mind clearly working through the same possibilities that had plagued Ashley earlier. "Did he give you a name?" he asked, and Ashley hesitated, her heart pounding as she remembered the way Greyson had looked at her, the warning in his eyes, the unfinished word on his lips. "He tried," she said softly, but he didn't finish, and the frustration in her voice was unmistakable, because that missing piece, that one crucial detail, was the difference between clarity and chaos, between knowing and guessing, and without it, they were left in the dark, forced to question everything and everyone. Danny shifted uncomfortably, her gaze moving between them, and for the first time, there was something else there, something that looked almost like fear, though whether it was fear of the situation or fear of being suspected was impossible to tell. "So what? We just start pointing fingers now?" she asked, her tone sharper than before, defensive, and Ashley felt a flicker of doubt, because this was exactly what whoever was behind this would want. Division, mistrust, chaos, and yet, ignoring the possibility wasn't an option either, not after what Greyson had said. "No," Ashley replied firmly, though her voice still carried the weight of uncertainty. "We don't point fingers, we find the truth," and Tomas nodded in agreement, though his eyes remained wary, scanning the room as if the answers might be hidden in plain sight. "And we do it carefully," he added, his tone serious, "because if Greyson was right, then we're not just dealing with someone dangerous, we're dealing with someone smart, someone who's been playing us this whole time." And as those words settled over them, the reality of their situation became impossible to ignore, because this wasn't just a mystery anymore, it was a game, a carefully orchestrated one, and they were already several moves behind. And somewhere, Not too far away, in the quiet darkness beyond the flashing lights and whispered conversations, a figure watched, unseen, a faint smile playing on their lips as they turned away, confident that the secret Greyson had tried to reveal was still safe, at least for now, because the most dangerous truths weren't the ones that were spoken. They were the ones left unfinished, lingering in the minds of those desperate enough to chase them. And as Ashley, Tomas, and Danny stood together in that room, bound by uncertainty and the fragile thread of trust that could snap at any moment, the real game had only just begun, and whether they realized it or not, every move they made from this point forward would bring them closer to the truth, or straight into the hands of the one who had been controlling everything all along. The silence that followed Tomas's warning lingered like a shadow stretching across the room, thick and suffocating, as if even the walls of Ashley's house were listening, absorbing every word, every glance, every flicker of doubt that passed between them, and for Ashley, the weight of it became almost unbearable, because what Greyson had left behind wasn't just a mystery, it was a fracture, a crack running through everything she thought she understood about the people around her, and no matter how hard she tried to steady herself, her thoughts kept circling back to that unfinished moment, the way his lips had formed the beginning of a name, the urgency in his eyes, the warning in his voice, and the terrible certainty that he had been trying to protect her even as he was dying, which meant the truth wasn't just dangerous, it was personal. "I keep hearing it," Ashley admitted quietly, almost to herself, though Tomas caught it, his gaze sharpening as he stepped a little closer. "Hearing what?" he asked, and she swallowed, her throat tight. The way he said it like he didn't want to believe it either, she replied, her voice trembling despite her effort to control it, and that detail seemed to hit Tomas harder than anything else she'd said so far, because it suggested something deeper than simple betrayal. It suggested shock, disbelief, the kind that came when someone you trusted beyond question turned out to be something else entirely, and Tomas exhaled slowly, the tension in his shoulders tightening as if he were bracing himself for a truth he wasn't ready to face. "Then we're looking at someone close," he said, his tone low and grim, and Danny immediately stiffened, her arms crossing defensively as she shot him a look. "That doesn't narrow it down much, does it?" she snapped, though there was an edge beneath her sarcasm, something brittle that Ashley couldn't ignore, and for a moment, the room threatened to fracture further under the strain of suspicion and fear. But before either of them could respond, a voice cut in from behind them, calm but authoritative, instantly shifting the dynamic in the room. "Actually, it narrows it down more than you think," and all three of them turned to see Nicole standing just inside the doorway, her presence unexpected, her expression unreadable in the dim light, and Ashley felt her breath catch, because Nicole's sudden appearances had become a pattern lately, always arriving at just the right, or wrong, moment, always. Knowing more than she should, and now, with Greyson's warning echoing in her mind, that pattern felt less like coincidence and more like something deliberate, something calculated. "Nicole," Danny said, her tone softening slightly, though the tension didn't fully leave her posture. "What are you doing here?" And Nicole stepped forward slowly, her gaze briefly flicking toward the couch where Greyson's body had been before being taken away, a shadow of something, regret, perhaps, or something deeper, crossing her face before it disappeared just as quickly, replaced by that same composed, controlled demeanor she always carried. "I heard what happened," she replied simply, though the way her eyes lingered on Ashley suggested there was more to it than that. "And I think it's time we stop pretending this is just a series of unfortunate events," she continued, her voice steady, each word carefully chosen, and Ashley felt a chill run through her, because that was exactly what Greyson had been trying to tell her, that none of this was random, that everything was connected. "What do you know?" Tomas asked bluntly, stepping forward now, his suspicion barely concealed, and for a moment, it looked like Nicole might deflect, might give one of her usual half-answers that revealed just enough to keep them guessing but not enough to give them clarity, but instead, she surprised them all by meeting his gaze head-on. "Enough to know that Greyson wasn't the only one who figured it out," she said, and the implication hung heavy in the air, because if that was true, then there were others, who might already be in danger, others who might already be gone. Ashley's heart began to race again, a new wave of urgency cutting through her grief. "Then tell us," she said, her voice firm despite the storm of emotions inside her. "Because whatever this is, it's already cost one life." And Nicole's expression shifted slightly at that, something softer flickering in her eyes before she looked away, as if the weight of that truth affected her more than she wanted to show. "It's bigger than you think," she said quietly, "and deeper. This isn't just about one person pulling strings. It's about a network, a system that's been in place for a long time." And Tomas frowned, clearly trying to piece together what she was saying. "What kind of system?" he pressed, and Nicole hesitated, just for a moment before answering. "One that protects itself at all costs," she said, and Ashley felt her stomach twist, because that sounded less like a conspiracy and more like something entrenched, something with power and reach far beyond what they had imagined. Danny let out a small, disbelieving laugh, shaking her head as she paced a few steps away. "So what? We're supposed to believe there's some secret organization hiding in plain sight, controlling everything?" she said, her tone skeptical, but there was a crack in it now, a hint of unease she couldn't quite hide, and Nicole didn't react defensively or dismissively. If anything, she looked almost resigned. "You don't have to believe it," she replied calmly, "but that doesn't make it any less real." And the simplicity of her response seemed to unsettle Danny more than any argument would have. Ashley stepped forward, her focus sharpening despite the chaos, because something about this, about Nicole, felt important, felt like a piece of the puzzle she couldn't afford to ignore. "Greyson said the person behind this is someone we trust," she said carefully, watching Nicole's reaction closely, and for the briefest moment, there it was, a flicker, almost imperceptible, but enough to confirm that the words had hit their mark. And Ashley's pulse quickened. "Do you know who he meant?" she asked, her voice steady but urgent, and the room seemed to hold its breath again as Nicole considered her answer.